during the pandemic. He was, very notably, back when people were first getting critically ill and in the ICU, Dr. Kory gave testimony at the Senate or the House, I can't remember which, and said that he was taking care of these patients and they were doing better with steroids. And Dr. Kory was, sort of ridiculed, and he received a lot of pushback for what he was saying. Months later, in fact, the randomized clinical trials showed that Dr. Kory was exactly correct, and steroid therapy for people who were intubated, people who had hypoxia with COVID-19, became the standard of care. Just a fantastic physician. Dr. Wallskog, today is my first day meeting him, and he is a leader in a group called React 19. React 19 is a group that tends to the needs of the vaccine injured. Right now, there's a tragedy going on in the background, and that tragedy is that first, a product was designed too rapidly without sufficient testing, and that is the mRNA COVID-19 vaccines. Second, that product was pushed out, often forced out, and distributed with coercion to so many millions, tens of millions of people in this country and millions of people around the world, to the tune of billions of people in total. And finally, when people were injured by that inadequately tested product, the ability to study their injuries, the ability to help them, which is what is needed when you've got to be able to collect data on patients, you've got to allow physicians to test different treatments, you've got to allow physicians to be able to communicate with one another in a very open manner, and to be able to communicate with patients in a very open manner. All of that was demolished. So terrible things happened, and even the ability to rectify those terrible things was not made possible because of the infrastructure that we saw for communication, for clinical care, for even patient interaction and connection with social media, censorship, and things like that. So it's a terrible crime. It's still happening. It's happening in the background. And Dr. Joe Wallskog has done a tremendous amount with his organization, React 19, and other courageous individuals who have been directly injured by mRNA COVID-19 vaccines and other types of COVID-19 vaccines. And so I'm really pleased that he's here too. So, when we talked about having an event today, really what's inspired this discussion first was finally seeing the federal government making I would say a position, a statement that is a Florida-esque statement. And the characteristic of Florida-esque statements is that we tend to make these statements months, if not years, before other people. So Robert F. Kennedy Jr., he's a good friend of mine. Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, also someone who's a good friend of mine. And, I was really happy to hear Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's the Secretary of Health and Human Services, make an announcement saying that, well, guys, we're no longer going to recommend or promote mRNA COVID-19 vaccines for healthy children. And some of the people here may remember when, thankfully, thanks to the courage and the willingness to do what is right, irrespective of whether it's popular, of Governor Ron DeSantis, we made that same announcement 3 years ago, I think, in South Florida, in Miami. And so we were happy to see the federal government doing that. And it's important to acknowledge that, Florida, certainly over the last few years, for many reasons, but in the health arena, particularly as it relates to medical freedoms and COVID-19, we've been in the news a lot, and we've taken a lot of heat. And, we've taken a lot of heat from the mainstream media. Ironically, during all this time, the people have been aligned with us. So more and more people have really moved from the position of buying into the things that we hear from the federal government into, frankly, agreeing, whether explicitly or implicitly, with what we've said in Florida. Very fortunately, very few people, very few children, and very few adults are putting these mRNA COVID-19 vaccines in their bodies. We still have older people doing it, but fewer people who are older are doing it also. And they shouldn't be doing it because they are not fit for human use. When was the last time that you had a vaccine that literally almost every single person knows someone who's had a bad reaction for them? Okay. I've been a physician with my MD since 2011. And, I've taken care of many patients, Boston, Los Angeles, and in Florida. I also see patients in the county health department from time to time. I have seen, until this pandemic, I could not tell you someone I knew individually who I was confident was actually injured from a vaccine. Now, there are very few people that I run into who either themselves have not had a bad reaction from these mRNA COVID-19 vaccines, or who don't know someone who's had a bad reaction from these vaccines. They are terrible vaccines. I want to also acknowledge something else. Some of the reason that there hasn't been enough discussion about these mRNA COVID-19 vaccines is because there's a perception among some people that President Donald Trump is somehow responsible for this. I want to make it very clear. President Donald Trump, last I checked, he didn't go to medical school. Okay. He doesn't have a PhD in epidemiology or virology or immunology. His job was to lead the nation, and he did that the best way he could with the information he had. The people who are responsible for the carnage that we are witnessing, and frankly, that whether we witness it in a way that we know or witness it in a way that is unknown. And I'm talking about people who die suddenly or die unexpectedly or for whatever reason. But they're no longer here to speak, right? So that story goes away, except in the minds of their loved ones. The people who are responsible are the people who had the training, who had the scientific training, the clinical training, the training in data to be able to know when things are risky, to be able to know how to properly evaluate new products. Those are the people who are responsible. Dr. Anthony Fauci is one of the people that are responsible. And frankly, every physician who decided to bury their head in the sand instead of facing up to the fact that the patient in front of them has some condition that could or probably was related to their vaccine injury, they are responsible. We all share, to some degree, a level of responsibility when we have training and expertise in this area. President Donald Trump is not responsible for the carnage that we have seen. He did the best that he could with the skills and the training that he has. Trying to protect President Trump is not a reason to not take care of the millions of people who have been injured by these mRNA COVID-19 vaccines. We have a duty to do that. We absolutely have a duty to do that as clinicians, as scientists. We must do what we can. It is the ultimate travesty to allow this to continue to fester in the background without adequate attention. So today, I want to call on the federal government, NIH, to expand the work that they are doing in long COVID to genuinely and wholly include vaccine injured people, specifically people who have been injured by mRNA COVID-19 vaccines. We need to study this better. We need to fund physicians who are caring for these patients clinically and who are doing scientific work in this area. And we need to create networks that allow physicians to do what they are trained to do. And you do that by facilitating communication, exchange of data, and exchange of ideas. And it is long past time. This is a terrible tragedy that it's still happening, even though we have a change of leadership. It is a terrible tragedy. So that's what I'm calling on the federal government to do today. And with that, I want to call Dr. Pierre Kory to the podium. Thanks, Dr. Kory.
Hi. Good morning. Just want to start by saying how honored I am to be here to speak on an issue that really is, to say, near and dear to my heart. It's really the central focus of my current life's work, is trying to treat the vaccine injured. And the other thing is, I'm just honored to be a citizen of Florida. And, Dr. Ladapo used the word Florida-esque. And, I think we should all recognize that Florida has been a leader in actually science of COVID in terms of being open, transparent, willing to ask the tough questions and provide guidance and really look at their data transparently and share it with others. They've evolved with the data. These consensuses that were created within minutes of this COVID, which is that an experimental vaccine is safe and effective. That was the mantra before any real data of long-term safety or efficacy was there, needed to be reexamined. And I think Florida has led that. They have very quickly acted in terms of resisting mandates, coercion, proof of vaccination. They even, created a statewide grand jury to look into fraud behind this, because I guarantee you there is fraud. Hard to detect and provide the evidence for, but it's there. And so anyway, I'm honored to be here and part of that. I think it's good science that's being done. It's science which is intended for the health of the public. You cannot make correct decisions unless you're fully informed. So how do you make health decisions unless you really are aware of the risks and benefits of any therapy that's being recommended or offered? And that wasn't the case in COVID. We were just simply told that everything was safe and effective. And many people were very trusting. That was their only fault, if that is a fault. And, like Dr. Ladapo mentioned, I think now the people are starting to ask questions because they know that they were essentially, you could say, lied to or misrepresented. And, one thing I'll say is Florida led the charge here, but Florida will never be as fast as an astute clinician. We know this stuff before any of you. Before the studies come out, before the database analysis is, we know it because we see it, those of us on the front lines. I will just kind of transition. I want to say a few minutes of what I've been doing for the last few years, but 3.5 years ago, I left the system of medicine or was excommunicated, one of the two. I think it was mutual. But I went into private practice, and with the sole intent of building a specialty practice focused on the care of the vaccine injured and long COVID. I recognized that it was the greatest unmet medical need in the country. The patients were being gaslit, ignored, misdiagnosed. And there were legions of them. In my public advocacy and wherever I traveled or asked to speak, I was talking to just innumerable vaccine injured. As a curious clinician, and I like challenges, I decided to take on this disease. And I've now spent 3.5 years treating patients who are chronically ill from the vaccine. Now, without going too much into the science, I personally differentiate, I use two different terms. Vaccine injury, the way I use it, I think about that as a single organ dysfunction problem. So a stroke, a heart attack, myocarditis, an autoimmune condition, what have you. When I use the term post-vaccine injury syndrome, that is a constellation of symptoms. And although we know this syndrome called long COVID, and we're only beginning to recognize long vax, I will tell you that is what my practice specializes in. Those are new terms for an old syndrome. What we're seeing is an epidemic of a disease that has long been called myalgic encephalitis / chronic fatigue syndrome. There's 3 pillars to that diagnosis, and they're all clinical. There are no tests for this syndrome, but it's patients who present with this constellation of fatigue, post-exertional malaise, and some sort of cognitive dysfunction that we sometimes use brain fog. That's not the only thing, the 3 things they come with, but those are generally present in any patient who comes to see me. They have a whole side menu, a side list of other symptoms from sensory neuropathies, motor neuropathies, cranial symptoms, headache syndromes, tinnitus, vertigo, inflammatory syndromes, but the core is that. And the Mayo Clinic called that out in 2021 in regards to COVID, that they were seeing unprecedented rates of ME/CFS. Historically, ME/CFS has always been associated with infections. The most common is EBV or mono. Lyme disease can do it. Mycoplasma can do it. But with COVID, it's immense. And here's what I want to tell you, that in my practice, we treat long COVID and long vax. 70% of the patients in my practice became ill after the vaccine. They are long vax. The vast majority of what this rest of science in this country is calling long COVID is actually long vax. And how do I know the difference? Very easy. It's called temporal association. If someone's symptoms present within days to weeks of COVID, long COVID. If it presents within days to weeks or sometimes minutes to hours of the vaccine, it's long vax. It's not that complicated to know what the trigger was. And they both share pathogenic insults, which is this spike protein. And the sadness, and I'll try to wrap up because I don't want to go too long, but the sadness is in my first year in practice, I think the value that I brought to the patients is I listened to them. They understood that I understood them. I wasn't gaslighting them. I knew what was wrong with them, or I knew what caused their illness, and I was willing to try to treat it. 3.5 years later, I think the value I bring is immense clinical experience using a diversity of therapies where I've been able to mitigate much of their suffering and return quite a bit of functioning. Many of them became disabled. And when I say that is so many of my patients, when you take their history prior to their illness, they will report that they ate well. They were absolutely successful in their careers. They liked to exercise and stay fit. They were raising their children. And now they found themselves barely able to get out of bed in some cases. Or if they do, they immediately get fatigued and they're back in their house. And a lot of them are housebound. They cannot work anymore. They become financially unhealthy. So the amount of kind of ways in which they get sick is immeasurable. It's not only physical, it's financial, it's sexual, like with their relationships, it's occupational, they can't work. And so I see these multiply disabled patients who are really enjoying like the peak of their lives and now are decimated. And it's an endless sadness, but I'm very proud of the work I've done with myself and my colleagues. We've helped innumerable of them, but it is the most complex and idiosyncratic disease that I've ever encountered. And I hope to continue that work. And so I want to second that call that Dr. Ladapo just made, is that I've been doing this like hook and the crook, like a gumshoe detective trying to figure out how to help these patients. But I'd love for the government to back us up and find really good research that can help understand the disease better, select therapies better in order to mitigate the immense suffering that I see on a daily basis. So I'm really appreciative and grateful that you asked me to come, Joe. Dr. Wallskog. Oh, I'm supposed to introduce my colleague, Dr. Wallskog. He's been a longtime friend and colleague now. We met in COVID. We both worked in Wisconsin together. And, just as I talked about my experiences, I will say that Dr. Wallskog, he's been involved in really attending to supporting the vaccine injured, not only promoting research, but also financial support. In fact, part of your early fundraising was devoted to paying for the care of many of the vaccine injured. And he's since gone on to do lots more things and working on changing policy. And so I appreciate his organization that he co-founded, which is React 19, and everything that they're doing. And so welcome to Dr. Joel Wallskog.
Thank you, Pierre. And thank you, Dr. Ladapo, for the invitation to speak today at the press conference here to discuss the removal of the COVID-19 shots in pregnant women and from the childhood immunization schedule here in the United States. Let me be clear. The COVID shots should have never been authorized in children and pregnant women, even in emergency use. As a physician, as a person who sustained an adverse event to the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine, or I should say shot, and as co-chairman of React 19, which represents almost 40,000 Americans, I am hopeful that I can provide you all with some unique perspectives in the development and the safety of the COVID shots. I enjoyed a successful orthopedic practice in Wisconsin for 19 years. On December 30th of 2020, I received my one and only Moderna shot. Within 1 week after this injection, I developed problems with my legs, including weakness, numbness, and loss of balance, leading to numerous falls. I was diagnosed with transverse myelitis. All my providers did not even recognize the association of the injection. Since my original diagnosis, I've also been diagnosed with autonomic dysfunction and an unspecified immune disorder. I was forced to medically retire. I am now co-chair of React 19, which is a science-based, non-political, nonprofit organization that represents Americans seriously injured by the COVID-19 shots. Our mission is to provide the injured community with financial, physical, and emotional support. I am here today to express my profound concerns regarding the development and safety of the COVID-19 shots, particularly in children and pregnant women. In 2021, the American public was reassured that the clinical trials were rigorous, with required oversight by our federal health regulatory agencies. We were also reassured that the rollout of the shots was carefully managed. We were repeatedly told the shots were safe. Growing evidence paints quite a different story. The process was undoubtedly rushed. Safety data was withheld or in certain instances altered. Maddie DeGarry, many of you may know her story. She was injured during the phase 3 Pfizer trial. She was 14. That was at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. She's 17 now, still in a wheelchair and using a feeding tube for nutrition. She has been gaslit by almost all of her providers in Ohio, and she's currently actually up in Jacksonville rehabilitating through the Ronald McDonald House. If you review that phase 3 clinical trial data about Maddie, her symptoms are basically reduced to a stomachache. And of course, not related to her Pfizer injection that received as part of the phase 3 clinical trial. Reporting systems such as VAERS and vSafe have been dismal failures. Are such reporting systems deficient by design, is one of my questions. Are regulatory agencies such as the FDA publicly supported and openly promoted the experimental countermeasures in an obvious conflict of interest to its mission to protect Americans from drugs and medical devices? Regulatory norms were ignored. Instead of requiring pharmaceutical companies to prove the product was safe and effective, the COVID-19s were assumed to be safe and effective, with follow-up data sometimes as short as 2 weeks. These products were given to pregnant and lactating women, as well as children, with no long-term safety data. This decision to do that is counter to hundreds of years of medical dictum not to use experimental products in pregnant and lactating women and in children. I say all this to you today not to relive the past. I choose instead to admit the things we could have done better. I choose to focus on science and not polarizing, rhetoric. In React 19, we often say we've had negative reactions, but we seek positive actions. Science is rarely settled. Scientific conclusions can be changed with new information. I am certainly glad and appreciative that the COVID-19 shots have been removed from the childhood vaccination schedule for healthy children. This decision in healthy children and pregnant women will undoubtedly reduce future injury to these populations. However, much damage has already been done. There are countless children and adults who have been injured by the COVID-19 shots. As Americans, we need to recognize our fellow citizens injured by the COVID-19 shots in a non-judgmental fashion. They need acknowledgement, research, medical care, as well as fair and just compensation. I will not stop until we achieve these humanitarian goals. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Wallskog. Okay, well, we'll take a few questions. Anyone who has questions for Dr. Kory, Dr. Wallskog, or myself?
What if one vaccine worse than another? And what's the future for people who already taken vaccine? They're going to have a problem as they go over their lives.
Yeah, very, very important questions. So first of all, multiple studies now, to be very clear, multiple studies now show that of the two, Moderna and Pfizer is definitely worse. Pfizer is worse for cardiovascular side effects related to blood clotting. Pfizer is worse for neurologic effects, and Pfizer is worse for serious adverse events overall. A few studies have shown that Pfizer may be associated with an increase in mortality also compared to Moderna. The vaccines, they are not the same. You've heard my opinion, Dr. Kory's, Dr. Wallskog's opinions about their use in general, but between the two of them, Pfizer is definitely worse. You've got probably more myocarditis cases with Moderna, but Pfizer is worse overall. And then, the second question you asked is a really good one. Another doctor that I think probably all of us admire, a doctor named Dr. Mary Bowden in Texas. She's been writing a bit about how she's been testing antibody levels, and what she's finding is that levels of antibody to spike protein for people who have been vaccinated, who are her patients, they remain elevated for long periods of time, and that's not normal. That's completely abnormal. So this is just part of the reason why we absolutely need more infrastructure in this area, more scientific infrastructure, more funding to support the patients and the physicians and the scientists who can help us understand what the long-term impacts are for all populations who've received these products.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Question. So, can you speak a little bit to the determination to remove it from the vaccine schedule for healthy children versus the verbiage of saying for all children?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that we get there. Obviously, there's a difference, and I hope that we get there, because these products, they should not be used in any human beings, and there's some people who are trying to put them in animals too, and I think many of us wouldn't want to eat that food either, that meat.
Sort of along those lines, what's your recommendation for the older population if they're weighing whether or not they should be at
Okay, yeah. So I apologize that it hasn't been clear. They shouldn't take them. They are products that should not be going into human beings. And in terms of alternatives for individuals who are still concerned, there are a few things to recognize. First of all, you should know that there is a lot of evidence from different studies in different groups that show that the people who receive these vaccines, including older people, eventually become at increased risk of contracting COVID-19. So there's a negative effect or negative efficacy, or pardon me, negative effectiveness associated with them. Second, there are treatments. The treatments aren't fantastic, but there are treatments. There's a drug that Merck makes. There's a drug that Pfizer makes called Paxlovid. There's actually another outpatient option too that's IV. And for prevention, there's actually a monoclonal antibody that's been approved by the FDA. So it essentially functions similar to a vaccine that people can take it. It's every 6 or 12 months or so. So there are options for people beyond that.
In your opinion, should the adjectives healthy and young, should those be dropped from the guidelines then? It should just be universal for everyone?
Yeah, so actually that brings me to the third point that I mentioned before. So at this point, literally every walking human being, every adult has had COVID-19 before. And the risk of an adverse outcome for someone who's had COVID-19 is extremely low. So we are in the area of for certainly for young people, of something that is comparable to, to the cold, right? To rhinovirus. People can still get sick, but in terms of actual major health impacts, for almost virtually all young people and virtually all healthy people who've had this before, it's really not something that it should be elevated to the level of other conditions that we have more concern about. And then the other thing again to mention is that increasingly it appears that the folks who have received these vaccines, particularly when they've been boosted and particularly when they continue to be boosted, appear to actually be at highest risk of becoming seriously ill from the virus. Great. Okay. Go ahead, sir.
What level of optimism are you at when it comes to we'll figure this out, we'll get, say, vaccines or maybe no vaccines? Like, how do you feel about that in the future going forward?
Am I an optimistic person? I'm not sure. I generally think that, I wouldn't even call it optimism. Optimism is a wrong word. I am confident that things are going to get better. What I don't know is the time, how long it's going to take, what the timeline is, but I'm very confident that things are going to get better. And it's really up to us to keep doing what we're doing here today, what these guys have been doing for years, and what other people who have been courageous and really stood with the truth however uncomfortable it was. So with all of that, we're going to keep going in the right direction. The more of us that do it, the faster we'll get there. All right. Thank you guys very much. Okay. Thanks, guys. I think we'll go. Thank you so much.